In Warhammer, a prison could be a cage, a desert, a mine, a shrine, or the inside of a living beast. In today's episode, we bring you a list of 7 short stories as we follow 7 captives across worlds and ages, each learning what chains and imprisonment truly mean. The worst part is not necessarily the pain, but the waiting. The sure knowledge that something dark is coming, and nothing can stop it. Time swells into drips, distant steps, the slide of a key. It is the world shrinking until it fits between iron bars and skin. Limbs ache, then go numb, and chains teach new borders to the body. From Skaven pits to Druchii decks, from chaos holds to the gut of a Tyranid ship. This is not a tale of rescue. It is a tour of endurance, terror, and the thin thread of hope. If you are ready, we shall begin. In this first story, we enter the dirty, rusted cages of Hell Pit, where hundreds of captives are kept as raw stock for experiments, and worse, by the Skaven of Clan Moulder. Here, a dwarf laments his fate as he watches the ratmen sort flesh and tally screams, learning what the prisoners must endure. He knows his turn draws near, and the wheel never stops.
Hark well to the words I etch on stone, ye who have taken my place. Take solace with your gods, whoever they may be, when you hear the chains in rhythm with paw steps come to you, and the bells toll. Make peace, and shut your eyes. I can smell the green reek. They boil in their cauldrons even from the pens as far as here. The packmasters walk past our gibbets with their hooks and brands, counting us as if we were sacks of food. They chitter darkly as they write numbers on our skin with filthy, rusty nails. In the dark, deep of this forlorn dungeon, you will hear them laugh. Smile with joy that they do not laugh at you, for when you hear it, you will also hear a scream of abject agony twined with it. Oh, I hear what awaits. I've read the runes back home. Oft do I see discarded Umgi, Dowie, Delgi, be dragged in their mutated state of eternal pain, and thrown below like waste. They scream about and their limbs writhe as a rat man flings them away. When silence comes, just for a moment, I hear those sorry souls wallow below, alive and begging for death. And then, before long, silence again. If you read this etch, then you will see what they do to us. 6-eyed leviathans, each eye blurred with tears of pain or rage. Malformed mouths that gibber an amalgamation of words from different tongues. One such monster, as hideous as I describe now, I knew the runes on the scrap of leather stitched into its hide. A clan mark. A brother, once. They dragged him out and cut him apart and fed him back to himself until his shape completely changed. A rat ogre came to the bars today, urged on by whips that cracked. It pressed its face to the iron and breathed on me, baring its teeth. Oh, its breath was like old blood and cold ashes. I saw nails where teeth should be, and tools buried in its shoulders, as if the flesh had grown around them. You will wonder, as I do now, what the Rat Man will do to you when he comes pattering to your cage. You will begin to see more rat men near your cell. That means your time is short. I know they will take me soon. I fear not death as a dowie, but life as a beast of burden, a pet, a toy for rat men. They come for me soon. Oh gods, oh gods. Weep quietly now, lest rat ogres and their masters smell it. I have watched the order of things long enough to know. First, they will burn me with warpstone, then cut with the saw that grinds bones to sparks, then with the stitching that pulls flesh together in unnatural ways. They will pour their poison into my veins and teach my hands to obey a whistle. They will give me new strength and take my name. When the changing begins, I will beg my mind to remember the taste of stone dust and the weight of a hammer. But then, even that will go. They will turn me towards the pens and I will run on all fours. If any of my kin find these words on this wall to my hanging cage, write my name, Barty Snarrison, in the great book. Bring fire. Fire! Do not fear to use it on what wears my beard. If I roar at you from a broken mouth or more, answer with powder and flame. Let me go as a dwarf, and not as a mockery. Oh, they are coming now. I can hear the bell. It is time. Oh, but
In this second short story, we move to the far future, where a Cadian soldier realizes he is suddenly trapped in a dark place that breathes and shifts. It is not a conventional cell, but a living hold with a mindless hunger. A terrible fate closes in on him and his crew as the grim truth dawns upon them. Everything happened so quickly. The Tyranid bioships were suddenly everywhere, and the battle was definitely not going to plan. What had started as a calculated trap, laid to crush the approaching Xenos threat before it could spread further, quickly devolved into a slaughter.
Our brothers have fallen!
The swarming bioships moved like predators in a feeding frenzy, weaving through the Imperial line of battleships, splitting it apart with an almost instinctual precision. Then they were inside. Thousands of them. Gaunts, Ripper swarms, Gene Stealers, and abominations beyond naming. Each one a living weapon bred for slaughter. They poured into the ships like torrents of death, surging through every breach and vent, spreading through the Imperial fleet like a vile infestation. The Imperial forces fought valiant, holding choke points and barricading passageways, but ultimately it was a losing battle. Orders barked across Fox channels became drowned out by the hiss of static and the agonized screams of those dying within their shattered vessels.
Emperor's light, no!
The astropath is convulsing! We can't get a hymnal to Terra!
Blessed Emperor, get us out of here, all speed! They must be warned! Someone must!
He gripped his lasgun tight, his heart pounding as he fought the primal urge to run. The air was thick and oppressive. Every breath felt like a struggle as Sergeant Varen stumbled through the dim, fleshy corridors. His boots squelched against the pulsing floor, slick with some unnameable secretion. The walls shifted around him. No, they breathed. A steady, rhythmic pulse, like the inhaling and exhaling of a colossal beast. At first he had thought the ship had been breached, that they were aboard a wrecked vessel, adrift in the void. But as the walls quivered and contracted, like muscles clenching in the body of a leviathan, the horrifying realization dawned upon him. They hadn't survived. He and the crew had been swallowed whole by a Tyranid bioship. They were in the pit of its stomach. He understood. Varen wondered for a moment if he'd survive, yet he knew there was nowhere to go. They were inside the beast, and the beast was alive. Being swallowed by a Tyranid bioship is one of the most terrifying experiences there could be for any living, conscious being. In this chapter, we are going to go through a short extract from The Last Hunt by Robbie McNiven, which follows the story of the White Scars in their defense against the Tyranids of Hive Fleet Cicatrix. In this segment, one crew of human soldiers manning an Augur space station is swallowed whole by a giant Tyranid ship. This particular short story goes as follows. The Tyranid bioship had filled the view screens. Even as the stunned crew watched, the monstrosity's great, hooked chitin beak split apart. The maw yawned wide, impossibly wide. Wide enough, Davrik was sure, to swallow one of Darkan's moons. Its shadow fell across the Augur station, blotting out the light of the stars. The structure around them seemed to shudder, as though its terror matched that of its crew. The view screen now showed nothing but static-washed darkness. It had swallowed them whole. Corday had slumped on the deck, shaking and weeping uncontrollably. Crassus was looking down into his lap, knuckles white where he gripped the arms of his chair. Ankum had finally stopped gibbering. "Serene," he managed to say, looking over at the Augur analyst. "Serene, there's something I need to tell you." She continued to stare at the now blank view screen. A sudden impact threw them all. Davrik found himself sprawling across the deck, almost on top of Corday. The station shook violently, tremors dislodging rune banks and audio systems, and sending Davrik's empty recaf tin bouncing across the deck. The alarms triggered again across the cramped station. Crassus, who alone had managed to stay in his seat, deactivated them without comment. The view screen had gone offline completely, showing nothing but gray static. They're going to board us?" Ankum stammered as they picked themselves up. Any response was lost in another jarring impact. The station's frame shrieked in protest at the stresses put upon it. With their systems scrambled and broken, it was impossible to tell exactly where they were, or what was happening outside. The station seemed to settle slightly. The sounds of tortured metal reduced to a low creak. They all scanned the ceiling, looking for any sign of a breach. "Do you hear that?" Serene said. It was the first time she'd spoken since seeing the bioship. They all listened, breath held, straining to hear over the groan of adamantium and Corday's muted sobs. Eventually, Davrick caught what Serene had detected. A faint scratching, scrabbling noise, as though someone, or something, was scraping across the outside of the hull. It mirrored the scratching, tormenting all of them from inside their own skulls. "They're on the hull," Davrick said. Before he could go on, a crash shattered the breathless quiet. The section directly above Crassus's chair, in the center of the station's cockpit, collapsed. With it came a flood of broiling green liquid that struck Crassus just as he looked up. If the old sense room master managed to draw breath to scream, the bioacid flooded his mouth before he could make a sound. Davrick caught an impression of his death as he was lost entirely in the torrent. Organics consumed in a heartbeat. The rest of the crew recoiled, but too slowly. Serene, nearest to the center of the cockpit, was struck by the acidic spray. Her hands went up to her exposed face, and her screaming filled the claustrophobic space. "No!" Ankem wailed, lunging across his bench to catch the auger analyst as she collapsed. He managed to drag her hands away from her face, then recoiled. Her features had already been reduced to pockmarked bone, her eyeballs running like liquid from their sockets, tendons slipping away with her fingers. Still, she screamed. Ankem doubled over and was sick. Davrick, whose station was furthest from Crassus's chair, scrambled back on top of his bench as the flood of acid spread across the decking plates. Serene had collapsed into the rising swill. Ankem tried to push himself against his vox banks, but was sick again and collapsed. The bugs got to him before the acid. There were insects in the hissing, steaming slime. Writhing, sightless maggot things, with hard black shells. They swarmed from the discolored biomatter, the air full of the susurration of their passing as they swiftly covered the deck, and then the cogitator stations, workbenches and walls, riding the rising tide of acid. First hundreds, and then thousands of them reached Ankem, swarming over his boots and knees and up his arms where he was crouched against the Vox systems. He tried to scream, but he choked. His eyes rolled back into their sockets as the alien swarm began eating him. Face still streaked with tears, Corday leapt directly from his bench into the stream that had consumed Crassus and his command chair. He was gone in an instant, as the breach in the station hull was burned wider. As Ankem's remains collapsed into the bioorganics sloshing about the cockpit's deck, Davrick stood rooted to the top of his bench. He couldn't think, couldn't move. He was in the throes of panic. A part of him realized he should end it quickly like Corday, but another part was desperate for another way out. Any way out that avoided the nightmare bile that was burning away everything. It was digesting the whole station, even as the terror kept him in place. Grohl's binary chair collapsed, pitching the unresponsive tech adept into the effluvium. His red cloak billowed for a moment before he was lost, coming apart amidst the steaming clouds of liquefied organics. For a moment, Davrick was alone. For a single, ludicrous second, everything felt surreal, ridiculous, almost calm. It had to be a nightmare. None of this horror could possibly be real. Then his bench collapsed.
Oh, God, Emperor, no!
He screamed, trying to scramble back onto the plastile's disintegrating remains.
No! No! No!
The bioacid caught him, sloshing around his boots and his lower fatigues. His panicked wails quickly turned to screams as the material was eaten away, exposing the flesh that in turn began to slough off. Muscle and sinew became organic paste that revealed bone that gave way and splintered beneath its own acid-gnawed weight. Davrik disintegrated slowly on his knees, eaten up inch by inch by the bile and the sightless, burrowing things that swam in it. Eventually, the insects flooded his raw throat, choking and suffocating him as they ate him from the inside out. The acid took what remained, as another section of the hull caved to emit a fresh gout of vicious toxins. This scene describes the terror of the last moments the crew endured, at least briefly, after being swallowed whole by the gigantic bioship and then absorbed by the interiors of it. The crew and all the material would then be processed by the giant Xenos ship to be converted into new Tyranid bioorganisms to continue the process of endless corruption. Next, we have the short story of a human warrior determined to stop the Druchii raiders from pillaging and raiding his home. Things turn for the worse when he soon learns that the fighting prowess of the Dark Elves is far superior to that of himself and his men. In a quick but one-sided battle, he and many of his men are taken captive and taken to a massive ship known as a Black Ark. He learns the rules of doors that only open one way, and the price the Dark Elves demand from the broken. Each wave carries him closer to a future written in ritual and pain.
I swung my blade with all the strength my trembling arms could muster, but it made no difference. No matter how fiercely we resisted trying to protect our loved ones, the Dark Elves just fought with a calculated precision that not even the best of us could match, slicing through our lines as if our resistance meant nothing to them. I still hear the screams of my neighbors as those black armored devils drove them up the gangways and into those towering, cursed black arcs. Couldn't save anyone. Gods, we couldn't even save ourselves. Many perished in the battle, if you could even call it that. But many of us lived. Now I stand here, shackled and bleeding, on the very deck where I watched my townsfolk vanish below. Ahead lies Naggaroth, they say. A land colder than death itself, where a man's spirit is just another trinket to be broken. Perhaps this is my last sunrise. If they'll even let me see the sun again. I fought for my home, but the only reward I've earned is a long, dark road to a fate worse than any grave.
In this fourth segment, we explore the tribulations that Rogel Dorn, Primarch of the Imperial Fist's Legion, had to endure when he was caught in Horus's powerful psychic trap. As he teleported himself and others into what was supposed to be Horus's flagship, the vengeful spirit, during the final battle in the Siege of Terra. He was instead suddenly trapped in an endless desert with nowhere to go. Knowing that Terra was still falling apart, knowing that the Emperor, Sanguinius, Valdor, and the others were in peril, most likely also in a trap. His sense of duty crushing him from the inside, at not being able to do anything about it, must have been a grim sensation. This is the story of what the Primarch had to go through. Rogel Dorn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists Legion, found himself in a harrowing situation as part of Horus's trap. Dorn materialized not with his companions, but alone, in a seemingly endless, sweltering desert. That place was a psychic construct, designed to disorient and break him. And the trap was cruel indeed. He was alone, surrounded by the dead bodies of the Imperial Fists, his sons. Dorn started to wander the desert, looking for structures, roads, landmarks, an exit, or anything that he could take into account. But the Red Desert was endless. He continued exploring it anyways. Time passed, and nothing else could be found in that damned place. To keep his head sane, he kept repeating the facts he knew for certain. I am Rogel Dorn, Praetorian of Terra, Primarch of the 7th Legion Imperial Fists, 7th Found Son, defiant and unyielding. The phrase was repeated countless times by Rogel Dorn to the hot and empty desert air. 100 years passed, or more than that. The Primarch was not so sure anymore. 2 or 3 centuries, perhaps, in which time he had walked the length of every wall and trekked the crest of every dune, surveying every inch of the boundless waste. There exist barriers, aged walls of stone, their pink hue faded and bleached by relentless light. Insurmountably tall, their purpose eludes him. They neither contain nor exclude anything, simply stretching across the dunes in branching, orderly patterns. His efforts to scale them proved futile. He pressed his ear against them, yearning for any sound from the other side or beyond. Yet nothing could be heard. After years of wandering around, exploring the seemingly endless Red Desert, marking stones, walls, and ordering patterns together, he came to the conclusion that entry into this place was unattainable, despite him being present within it. That implies the notion to be false. He arrived at that location at some point. He was somehow transported here. There had to be an entry point. Unless his existence had always been bound to the desert. And as the ages go by, this began to seem like the actual reality of the Primarch's existence. On certain days, he reached the peak of the tallest dunes. There, as the wind stirred the sand at his feet, he could nearly peer over the barriers. Nearly. Just enough to discern the strange, angular patterns they formed, and to see that beyond them lied only more dunes and more walls. Those were facts. Every day, for what seemed to be an eternity, he ordered the facts he could be certain of. He was there, and no one else was. Fact. He was alone. Fact. His pattern was diverted. Fact. There was not the target principle, the vengeful spirit. Fact. It was a trap. Fact. The desert was endless, and there was no way out. Fact. Days, weeks, months, years, decades, centuries. Yet more time passed. He tried to make sense of the few truths he was able to grasp. He was once a warrior with a singular desire for battle. But they restrained him. They urged him to use his intellect, to take command, to be the one who dissected and understood the situation, to put in order the facts, claiming his proficiency in such tasks. They commanded him. But who were they? How long ago was it? Rogel could remember he was in charge of protecting some king, or an emperor, or some figure of high status. He was ordered to protect a big palace, and he was in a siege. Or was he? As time passed, he could barely remember that once he had to make thousands and thousands of choices, manage resources, personnel, use stratagems, protect the walls, defend. Yet he yearned not to bear the weight of these choices. The responsibility was eroding him from within. A secret he kept to himself. He longed to relinquish control, to have someone else bear the burden of decision, to have others sort through the facts. His deepest wish was to abandon it all at the walls, to lose himself in combat, embodying the role of a simple soldier armed with a blade, just to engage in battle. No contemplation, no resolutions. Merely to fight with a liberated, unburdened spirit, as his peers did, to engage in the pure, thought-free act of combat, to relish in the liberation it offered, to be consumed by the primal act of spilling blood. That was his sole, unadulterated desire, wishing nothing more than the simplicity of bloodshed. There was no way out of the endless place. He knew this, because in the course of centuries, he had walked the length of every wall and trekked the crest of every dune, surveying every inch of the boundless waste. There was no way out, except to say it. It wants him to say it, but he won't. He won't give in, even though he felt like that's what he had always really wanted to do. He wasn't sure of anything anymore. There were no facts, no data, nothing he could order, no warriors to command. He was only sure of one thing. I am, he said. He had nearly rusted away. The breeze and sun had bleached the identifier markings from his war gear. He wasn't completely sure of his own name. Whatever he needed to get back to, whatever he had missed, it would have ended long ago. As time marched on, he endlessly reworked his plans, abandoning old ones and formulating new strategies. His continuous, tedious attempts, marked by the dry tones of his self-lectures and the persistent scratching of his blade, eventually silenced the Red's seductive whispers. In their place, different sounds emerged. Faint echoes of conflict, and ruin from beyond the wall. He halted, attentively listening, pressing his ear against the solid barrier. The clamor seemed almost within reach, just beyond the wall's confines. The allure of these sounds was strong, yet the wall stood unyielding, just a fraction too tall for him to scale. And he knew that even the summit of the tallest dune wouldn't afford him a view over the edge. The desire to see, to understand, to surrender to the chaos and immerse himself in the unthinking brutality of bloodshed. It gnawed at him. Yet the only path to the other side, to the cacophony of battle he yearned to join, was through conceding to the Whisper's demands. The noise of war on the other side of the wall eventually became a palpable roar.
Give in. Give up. Just say it. Blood for the blood god. Blood for the blood god.
There are no gods, said Rogel Dorn. He leaned close to the wall, his mouth almost touching it. Not even you. On the last day of his last year in the desert, the only star that Rogel Dorn could see in the sky went out. He couldn't know or care for how long he'd been there, or how many centuries had trickled past. Time seemed to have slipped away from him, like sand through an hourglass, as though all the sand in the entire desert surrounding him had trickled away. Time had taken everything away with it. His purpose, his self, the luster of his armor, even his name. But when the star went out, it seemed to mean something.
Who is the blood for? Just say it.
After all that time, he wanted to. It would have been so easy. He wouldn't need a plan then. He wouldn't have to plan anything. It was so very tempting. He thought, in fact, that he could finally say it on that day. What was there to lose anyways? He couldn't remember, but it couldn't be much. He was going to say it. But then the star went out. And that seemed to matter, because very little had changed over the ages he had spent there. The tempting voices, the hisses that have spoken to him, had ceased, replaced instead by a distant, somehow familiar voice that seemed to ask for help. Perhaps, he thought, that time he would be able to help the voice. Maybe if he made another plan, it could work. He had made countless other plans by that point. Plans to escape, to find routes outside, but to no avail. Yet despite that, the Primarch started another plan, marking the wall before him, thinking that perhaps it could work. He marked an X across the wall, and the wall shook slightly when he did so. This is where it will end, this cross here, he said to himself, clawing at the wall at first, and then punching it with force. Then he clawed again, and punched it, finding the edges of the blocks, his heart racing for the first time in ages. He had found something. He could find a way through the wall. As Rogaldorn clawed his way through the wall, he found himself not in the desert anymore, but in a destroyed city, full of rubble and littered with all the bodies of the Imperial Fists that went with him in the Anabasis operation. The memories flooded back to him as he explored the destroyed city. I am Rogaldorn, Praetorian of Terra, Primarch of the 7th Legion Imperial Fists, 7th found son, defiant and unyielding, he said. As he explored further, he found a weapon, left behind by one of his Huskarls, and the Primarch of the Imperial Fists swore in that moment to avenge his fallen sons. He then set to follow the call he heard. The familiar voice. The call of the Emperor. In this 5th segment, we board a Void Raider. A humid hostage counts the thunder of armored footsteps as shrines whisper and engines groan. Ransom is not the plan, only terror and resignation.
When they dragged me aboard the Red Corsair's vessel, I knew any hope of mercy was lost. The cold, dark bowels of the ship became my world. A place where screams echoed and despair hung heavy in the air. We toiled endlessly, our bodies breaking under the relentless demands of our merciless masters. The only respite was the fleeting moments of unconsciousness from exhaustion, a brief escape from the ceaseless brutality. In the Red Corsair's grip, we were nothing but expendable tools. Our lives worth less than the rusted chains that bound us.
In this next story, we cross the ice to Naggaroth, where a dwarf slave feels the last of his hope loosen and fall away. Work never ends, the cold never lifts, and the marks on his wrists refuse to heal. He slowly begins to understand that he will remain a prisoner here until his final breath.
I've spat out hope so many winters ago, and I can scarcely remember its taste. These cursed winds have long since gnawed through my beard and my bones, leaving nothing but an echo. I've grown old beneath these iron grey skies, listening not for rescue, but for the slow grinding song of my own despair. Every year the snows deepen, and I sink another rung lower in my wretched pit. I cannot recall the laughter of kin, or the warmth of a forge's glow. It's all just cold and silent now. Oh, Falea, if you can hear me now, let the ice swallow me whole. Let these frosts be my only company, for I am no longer a dwarf. Just a forgotten whisper of a past that will never be reclaimed.
In this final story, we march into the Dracwald forest with an Imperial soldier whose company is ambushed and many of the men dragged below in chains. He wakes to green light and the stink of warp metal, witnessing the horrors of the Under-Empire, one chamber at a time. Down here, the tunnels run for miles. and none of them lead upward. I never thought that it would end like this. My name is Roderick, once a proud swordsman of the Empire, now nothing more than a prisoner in the dark, teeming bowels of a Skaven lair. As I sit here, scratching my account into the dirt floor of this cage with a stolen piece of bone, I can't help but wonder how things turn so quickly. The morning mist still clung to the ancient trees of the Dracwald as we set out. A small scouting force of the Empire, advancing below the massive shadows the forest cast. Beside me, my lifelong friends, Kurt and Johan. They shared jokes and stories to lift the spirits of our group. Despite the task ahead, their laughter was a welcome reprieve from the tension that knitted me.
Remember that time in Middenheim, Roderick?
Kurt began, a mischievous glint in his eye.
When you tried to impress the barmaid with your swordsmanship and nearly skewered the innkeeper's prize stuffed boar?
Johan chuckled, moving his head as he remembered the incident. I also smiled, as the memories of that day came to me. Kurt clapped me on the back as he continued.
Ah, but she was impressed, wasn't she? Ended up giving you a kiss on the cheek, if I recall correctly.
I couldn't help but smile at the memory. She did, and I've never lived it down thanks to you two. Our laughter echoed softly among the trees. A moment of lightness in the shadow of the forest. The camaraderie we shared was forged in countless drills, skirmishes, and the occasional pint of Bugman's beer when the chance allowed. Our mission was supposed to be simple. March through the Dracwald forest, scout for signs of beastmen, and report back. But the forest held a different horror. Without warning, the forest erupted into chaos. From the underbrush, a screeching horde of Skaven burst forth, their eyes gleaming with malice in the dim light. The air filled with the discordant clash of steel on steel and the guttural cries of man and beast. I drew my sword, and beside me, Kurt and Johan fought with the disciplined fury of seasoned soldiers, their blades moving quickly as they cut down foe after foe. Yet, for every Skaven that fell, it seemed two more took its place. It was an endless tide of verminous bodies. The forest itself seemed to conspire with our enemies, the dense foliage hindering our movements while providing cover for the Skaven's swift darting attacks. Confusion reigned as units became separated. The disciplined formations we had maintained, now shattered by the ferocity of the ambush. Shouts for regrouping were lost amidst the din of battle, the cacophony drowning out any hope of proper strategy. I find myself isolated, desperately parrying and striking at the shadowy figures that lunged at me from the darkness. In that moment, desperation took hold, a primal instinct to survive against overwhelming odds. I fought not as a soldier, but as a man cornered by death itself, each swing of my sword fueled by a blend of fear and defiance. The faces of my foes blurred into a single monstrous entity, a nightmare born from the bowels of the earth. A sudden impact to the back of my head sent stars exploding across my vision, and I staggered, my grip on my sword faltering. I turned, dazed, to face my assailant, but another blow sent me spiraling into darkness. My last conscious thought was of Kurt and Johan, the hope that they would somehow survive where I had fallen. Awakening to the throbbing pain in my head, I blinked against the dim, flickering light, struggling to orient myself. The stench of decay and filth hit me first, indicating to me that I wasn't in the Dracwald forest anymore. "My name is Roderick," I said softly, as if reminding myself who I was and where. I was confined in a cage, its bars cold against my touch. Panic clawed at my chest. To my left, Kurt was slumped against the bars of his own cage, his face a mask of pain, but alive. His eyes met mine with a mix of relief and despair. The relief of seeing him alive was a small comfort in our misery. I called out to him, my voice cracking. "Kurt, are you all right?" He managed a weak nod.
Alive. For now.
His gaze shifted beyond me, and I followed it to where Johann was confined. My heart sank. Johann was motionless. A stark, unnerving stillness to him, with dark stains of blood marring his tunic, giving away the gravity of his wounds. The terror that had been simmering beneath the surface surged forth at a dire realization. We were prisoners of the Skaven. An unthinkable fate that promised nothing but suffering and darkness. The thought of what might come next, of the twisted experiments and punishments the rat men were known for, sent shivers down my spine. Kurt's voice broke through my spiraling thoughts.
We need to stay strong. For Johann, for the captain, for all of us.
His words were meant to be encouraging, but the gravity of our situation weighed heavily on them. Flickering shadows cast by the warpstone-lit cavern seemed to dance mockingly. The sight of the insidious banner of Clan Scryer, adorned with the sinister symbols of warpstone and lightning, was a reminder of the malevolent intellect that governed our fate. In the dim, oppressive confines of the Skaven lair, time lost all meaning. The days, if they could be called that, in this perpetual gloom, were marked only by the sporadic and grim rituals of our captors. Occasionally we would watch in silent horror as fellow prisoners from our scouting force were dragged from their cages by the ratmen. I saw Godfrey, Leonardo, Luther, their pleas and cries fading into the dark unknown from which they never returned. Then they came for him. The ratmen took Johann from his cell. He had already stopped breathing, and I couldn't help but wonder what the ratmen would do to his lifeless body. I shook the thought off my head as I realized I was sobbing, drowned in anguish. Just a few hours later, they would bring in another, new and frightened prisoner to take Johann's place. Kurt, ever the heart of our small force even in these darkest of times, tried to muster words of encouragement.
Just hold on to hope. All of us. We will be rescued and taken from this place.
His voice a frail shadow of its former strength. Yet, hope was a scarce commodity in the depths of Clan Scryer's lair. As scarce as the meager scraps of food thrown at us, or the stale water poured into our wooden and dirty containers. Our physical condition deteriorated rapidly, weakened by the inadequate sustenance. and the damp, foul air of the mines. The once robust figures of my comrades and I were now gaunt, our faces drawn and hollow from the relentless despair and malnutrition. The cages that held us became filthy, surrounded by flies, worms, and small vermin. We had lost all sense of time. The endless cycle of darkness, our only constant companion. The psychological toll was just as debilitating as the physical. Each day, it was a struggle to maintain even a semblance of sanity. Down there in the shadowy confines of the Skaven lair, the Ratmen had been constructing one of their most feared creations, a warp lightning cannon. This monstrous device, a reflection of the perverse ingenuity of Clan Scryer, was being constructed not far from my cage, allowing me a clear view of its horrifying birth. The warp lightning cannon, a towering construct of metal and warpstone, was both fascinating and terrifying to behold. Its main structure consisted of a long, dark barrel, forged from the blackest metals, mounted upon a chassis that was littered with dials, tubes, and arcane mechanisms that pulsed with an ominous green light. Warpstone, the source of its devastating power, was handled with reverence and fear by the Skaven engineers. These glowing green shards were carefully inserted into the heart of this machine, their malignant energy crackling and hissing as if it were alive. I watched, unable to tear my gaze away, as groups of Skaven worked in frenzied coordination to assemble the cannon. Some scurried back and forth, bearing components too large for a single Ratman to carry, while others chanted in their chittering tongue. Once assembled, the warp lightning cannon was a sight of dark majesty, its barrel pointed menacingly forward, ready to unleash destruction upon the enemies of the Skaven. The final step of the assembly involved the attachment of a complex aiming mechanism, allowing the operators to direct the cannon's lethal energy with precision. Witnessing the construction and transportation of the warp lightning cannon, I felt a mix of awe and despair. Here was a machine designed solely for the purpose of death and destruction. In the midst of our despair, Kurt, his spirit unbroken, despite our dire circumstances, leaned closer to me one evening. His voice barely above a whisper, a determined glint in his eyes that I hadn't seen since before our capture.
I've been watching the guards, the patterns of their patrols. There's a flaw, a moment when their vigilance wanes just before the shift change. It's our best chance.
His plan was audacious, born of desperation and the instinct to survive that had been whittled down to a mere ember in the rest of us. He spoke of using the small, jagged piece of metal he had secretly sharpened against the stone floor of his cage to unlock the mechanism.
It'll be risky, but staying here guarantees death. If we time it right, we can slip out and navigate through the shadows using the noise of the machinery to cover our movements.
As he detailed the route he had memorized, tracing a map in the dirt of our cage floor, his enthusiasm was infectious, reigniting a spark of hope that I thought had been extinguished forever. But before he could even finish, a sudden commotion broke our whispered conference. A group of Skaven, larger and more menacing than the usual guards, converged upon us. Their claws scraped against the metal bars with a harsh, grating sound that sent shivers down my spine. Without warning, they unlocked Kurt's cage and dragged him out. His protests and struggles futile against their overwhelming numbers. I reached out, my fingers grasping air, as I watched my friend, my comrade, being carried away into the darkness from which no prisoner has returned. His eyes met mine as he tried to pass on to me his last remnants of courage and defiance. A silent plea to remember, to carry on. The plan, our first and last hope, vanished with him, leaving me alone with the echoing screams that soon followed. The loss of Kurt plunged me into an abyss from which I saw no escape. The flicker of hope his plan had ignited, at least shortly, was snuffed out, leaving me in a darkness more profound than the shadows that enveloped the Skaven lair. My days and nights, indistinguishable in the constant gloom of my cage, blurred into a monotonous cycle of despair. Loneliness gnawed at me. I had lost the will to fight, to resist, to even move. The thought of death became a strange companion, whispering sweet nothings of release from this nightmare. I wondered, with a detached curiosity, why the Skaven had spared me thus far. Why had they not dragged me away to meet the same fate as my friends, or forced me into the labor that had claimed the lives of so many others? Then, just as I had become numb to the grim reality of my existence, a sight jolted me back to alertness, and then terror. Among a group of creatures being herded by the Skaven for some vile purpose, I saw a being that shook the very foundations of my soul. It was Kurt, or at least what he had become. No longer the man who had whispered plans of escape with the determined glint in his eye. No longer the friend I had shared so many memories and adventures with. The figure before me was a grotesque mockery of his former self, a mutated aberration infused with the sickly glow of warpstone shards inserted all over him. His body was twisted, limbs unnaturally elongated, and his skin mottled with pulsating tumors. His eyes, once filled with intelligence and camaraderie, now glowed with an unnatural light, devoid of recognition or humanity. He drooled and howled, a sound so pitiful and terrifying that it cut through me like a knife. The horror of what Kurt had become, the utter eradication of his humanity, filled me with a revulsion deeper than I had ever known. This abomination, once my friend, was now a creature of warpstone-induced madness. The sight of him shattered the last vestiges of my will, leaving me to wonder if death, in any form, would be a mercy compared to the fate of becoming a plaything for the twisted experiments of Clan Scryer. In this state of near surrender, where fear had given way to a hollow resignation, the world around me seemed to fade into insignificance. The screams, the clanking of machinery, even the stench of decay and warpstone, it all seemed so distant, as if I were already departing this mortal coil. At the end, I was just a witness, to the darkness that lurked beneath the world of men. A darkness eager to consume all in its path.